Thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have so many students with us. My name is Waleska Vernon, and I am the Career Development Counselor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. And this is a session that a number of law schools have collaborated to bring to you today with your fearless leaders, Renata and Valerie at Ottawa U, spearheading all of this. We also have lots of students joining us from Western, York, McGill, Osgood, Ryerson, Western, and UBC. So it's a great group, and we're so delighted to have you here. From my perspective, I know that the topic of in-house counsel career pathways is one that we haven't really had a lot of programming on in recent years. So we're thrilled to bring that to you today. And I'm excited to introduce our four panelists who will be sharing their stories with us today. We've got Jason Badal, who is the Global Head of Multinationals and CPG at Shopify. Jason, if you want to just give a wave so people can see you. We've got Trish Callan, who is Senior VP and General Counsel at Sun Life. Fred Heaton, who's Senior Counsel and Head of Legal at Air Canada. And Nadia Petrolito, who's the Global Legal Operations Officer at L'Oreal, and she has just joined the Paris office. So that's exciting. If you want to read more about our panelists' bios, Valerie sent that information out in the invitation. So we won't go through bios today, but we will be getting lots of information about our panelists' career pathway. So I'm just going to dive right in with our first question. In terms of student questions, feel free, if you have brought questions to the session today, to put them in the chat. If you want to submit your questions confidentially, you can do so either sending them to me or to Valerie, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So diving right in, and perhaps, Fred, we can start with you. Describe what you do in your current role.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks to everybody who put this together, both at the universities and the CCCA. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to share a bit and demystify a bit what it's like being in-house, because as we spoke about in the prep, it was pretty mysterious, I think, for all of your panelists today too. So as an introduction to what I do, I lead the labor, employment, and privacy team at Air Canada. That's about 24 professionals, 12 of them are lawyers, practicing in the full range of what that description entails. So it could be unionized labor relations, non-union employment matters, human rights matters, privacy, workplace health and safety, workers' compensation. Also responsible for privacy as it pertains to employees and to customers, and corporate social responsibility, and recently compliance and regulatory matters as well. So fortunate to have a group of fantastic lawyers, paralegals, and assistants to help manage all that, because we're responsible for serving the company's needs, not only in Canada, but being internationally present around the world as well. Mandate to do a fair bit of the work internally ourselves, but of course, when it comes to foreign expertise, we're also frequently engaging external counsel. So that's my my role today.
Wonderful. And Jason, can you describe your role?
Hey everyone, how's it going? My role is on a global basis. I lead our multinational team, which is just the biggest companies in the world. Shopify, as it's grown, we've sort of split the world up from a commercial perspective into regions. So we have North America, we have Canada, we have EMEA, APAC. But there's a certain level of merchant, like the LVMHs of the world, or the Nestle's, Unilever's, Procter & Gamble's, the really, really big companies that, as we work with them on a global basis, we needed someone to basically figure that out. And so the way I describe my job is figuring out how to bring e-commerce to the largest companies in the world, many of whom are a little bit, late to that game, or not as cutting edge as some of the smaller entrants in e-commerce. And so that's what I do. I mean, I'll tie together why this makes sense from a legal perspective in probably a later call, but that's what it is for now. Sorry, a later question.
Great, thanks, Jason. And Trish, what does your role entail?
Sure. Thanks, Waleska, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and talk about this. I sure wish that when I was a student at Western, we would have had a session like this, because I didn't know when I left law school that I would spend most of my career in-house. So I'm General Counsel for Sun Life Canada. We provide a range of insurance and health and wellness products to about 6.5 million Canadians. We've got 3,500 employees and another 3,500 advisors that operate across the country. And I lead a team of about 85 legal professionals that support all aspects of Sun Life Canada's business. So like Fred, privacy, regulatory. I've got a team of litigators who handle directly all of our claims litigation, contractual, really the full gamut of issues. I'm also a member of the Canadian executive team, so I wear an executive hat and bring not only my legal perspective, but my executive perspective to that table. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Great. And Nadia, what do you do in your current role, your new role?
Yeah. Thanks, Celeste, and thank you for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here, and just like Trish, I think that I wish someone would have spoken to me about what it meant, because I wasn't expecting to have this career either. So the title that's been bestowed is Global Legal Operations Officer. So I don't know if any of you have already heard about this. It's a new position that's kind of been up and coming the last decade, I would think, but it's very new here at L'Oreal. But before that, I kind of had similar jobs like Fred, Jason, and Trish, where I was running the legal department in Canada, but then I was also running the communications, the ethics, and the corporate social responsibility program. So I was wearing several hats. So oddly enough, I think that experience led me to be chosen for this, which means that I will be heading for basically all of the legal teams here at L'Oreal and across the world. Understanding basically from a process, policy, strategy, vision standpoint of view of what basically in-house counsel teams are supposed to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. So what are the HR strategies? What are the policies, the digital tools, the technology behind it, the knowledge management? So all of those different aspects we'll be looking at and trying to come up with a plan that will satisfy everybody. So that's basically what we're looking at.
Excellent. And so you're all in different industries. How is in-house counsel defined generally in your industry? And in particular, what does it mean to be a business partner versus an advisor? Trish, maybe we can start with you on that one.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, although interestingly at Sun Life, we do consider ourselves advisors to the business. Like, we call our clients business partners. So I'm providing support. My team is providing support to our business partners to help them achieve, their strategies and meet their business objectives. The only clients that Sun Life have are our end clients, the clients who, purchase our products and services. And, I can summarize our role by telling you what our team purpose is, which is to provide strategic and proactive legal solutions to help our business partners, achieve their objectives. So we do consider ourselves, to be advisors, but in that, kind of more broad role.
Excellent. And Nadia, how is it defined in your industry?
Very differently, actually, because I think that we keep actually pushing and vehicling this message that we're actual business partners and not so much advisors. I think the business sees us as guardians, and I'm trying to, and this is hopefully what I'll be doing in this position, shifting that perception, because we are, of course, guardians of the business. We're there to protect the assets and the reputation, but we're also, for me, at least at L'Oreal, because we're sort of a real marketing-based company, and I'm sure Jason can empathize, a real sort of digital e-commerce based company, and our clients are pretty much all very different, and we're in all channels, right, in all sort of distribution channels, so it's a little bit different. So we have B2B, B2C, so it's a bit complicated, but internally, what hopefully we're going to be able to do is to really make sure that, yes, we're proactive, yes, that, we understand the business really, really well, but I think it's going to be really a question of, one, timing, meaning when does the business interact with us? Because I think in order for us to be proactive and to understand the business, I think that'll be the pivotal key point. And also market ourselves. So because we're such a bit of a marketing beast, I think that we actually ultimately as a legal team have to market ourselves internally. So I think that'll be a really big step. So for us at L'Oreal, I think that's where we're going to have to really work really hard. And I think the key words for us will have to be that we're business partners, that we're there to make the objectives happen. And I think that's the real message that we're going to try to bring across.
Right. So it's coming in as a checkbox for decisions of the business, but part of the decision-making process.
Sorry, I missed part of what you said, Waleska, so I'm not so sure, but.
So just saying, it sounds like you're trying to make a move to being part of the decision-making process as opposed to a checkbox at the end of
exactly. Exactly. I mean, it could be that we're a checkbox, couldn't say that, at the end, but there are some projects where I think will be the most important thing is that we're there at the beginning. So I think it'll be that whole process, and part of the whole operational work that I have to do is to make sure that we understand at what time that we really need to be consulted, because often when things go awry, it's because they didn't think of us at the right time. So I think that's what I'm going to be trying to, and sort of communications plan, I think that's what we're really going to be aiming to do internally to make them understand that.
And Jason, how is in-house counsel defined in your industry?
So our in-house team, I would say, I think in some ways they try to protect, and in some ways they're business advisors. It's funny, we've grown so quickly that I think we can outstrip our capabilities, and I think that team is sometimes there to say, you can't agree to that because practically speaking, or the reality is we can't agree to that. And I think oftentimes they're viewed as preventing things from happening. But what I always tell everyone is it's not the contract that prevents something from happening. It's the fact that the contract is based on reality, and the reality does not. We can't agree to things we can't do. And so I'd say, especially in a tech company, you have to be a business partner, and our team, our legal team definitely acts that way. And that's how, why I get along really well with them.
Great. And Fred, how is in-house counsel defined in your industry?
Sorry, thanks, Waleska. I think in some ways very similar to what you've heard here. I think there's an appreciation of the depth of knowledge that we bring about the company and about the industry that really distinguishes us from the outside counsel that we engage. So I think they value that we understand the reality, the business objectives, the strategy, what they're trying to accomplish, and also some of the constraints and obstacles that they face. And so there are certainly our external counsel that we rely on regularly and quite heavily. But I think in every industry, there's sort of a nugget there of the law that really becomes the domain where in-house counsel shine, because we really master that kind of knowledge and how those systems work. So I think we're valued that way for our knowledge, and I think that does speak to being a bit of a business partner. It's interesting to hear the others speak, and maybe as a bit of background for the students too, something we haven't mentioned is that the in-house bar has grown quite remarkably in the last 20 years. If you went back about 20 years from now, there were many, many fewer in-house lawyers around the world. And so some of what you're going to hear today, I think, reflects how we're all still grappling with some of these issues, how we're all still trying to find the optimal ways to provide the services that are needed, and do that in a way, being business partners, that responds to the needs of our clients. So unlike Trish, we do call them clients at Air Canada, and for us, that's a little bit of the foundation of being a lawyer, because one of the risks being in-house is you lose your objectivity because you come too close to the clients. And so this is part of the language we use to help reinforce that we do have an objectivity we need to bring. But Trish, I totally understand your point of view on this as well. I do not want to purport to have the final word on that debate. But I think we see ourselves, therefore, as the business partners with a high degree of specialized knowledge that's valuable. As Nadia said, too, we're the guardians of the business. We take that role very seriously. And I think that speaks to something very important in our training, that in legal training, you're often encouraged to think a few steps down the line. Think about especially litigation or putting together a deal. And that's not always just to find the obstacles, but also to anticipate how we're going to get over those obstacles. And so when we branch out from the purely legal and can help think through those more strategic questions for the business. I think that too demonstrates a fair bit of value that's very appreciated, because we can help them find new opportunities that they didn't see in a relationship, new ways of keeping themselves out of trouble. Importantly, I think when you think about those few steps down the line, maintaining confidence in the minds of our employees, for sure, and also very importantly, the customer base. And for I think all of us, there's an element of our business that they find very core. You know, when financial services, stability and confidentiality, for us, safety in the air, and we could go on and on. We always have to keep those things in mind, and I think the legal team can often help contribute something to keeping the business safe that way, that comes from our training. If the students are interested, there's an author, the former general counsel for General Electric internationally, but based in the United States, who's done some writing on this idea of the guardian of the business, of being the business partner. And he's now retired, and the term is very dated, so I apologize for that to this crowd, but I don't want to misquote him either. So he also refers to the role as a statesman. And by that, he gets to the idea of thinking about more generally your industry and where things should be going in the regulation. I think that has become part of all of our jobs as well. So I think that's where we're seen as being particularly valuable. I would just maybe pick up as well on the point about trying to find ways to develop relationships and keep that confidence of your internal clients. Something we've done is tried to work like our business partners, like our clients within the company. It came to me when one of our colleagues in finance one day said, legal likes to distinguish itself in all the wrong ways. And so I said, I'm taking you for coffee and you're going to explain this to me. And he did. And I realized that we do like to put up some barriers. And we like to think that we're professionals that are somehow isolated from the business or distinct or off in our little ivory tower, and we're going to do things our way. And if you think about it, there's a lot we can do that really doesn't change who we are. And some of these things can be minor little things. We switched legal over to the company font instead of Times New Roman after we realized the company had a font, right? Use the company colors in all of your publications. Use their vocabulary, because your marketing people have a vocabulary. Speak in the same kinds of ways as your clients within the business speak. And we went so far as to take a training program that was done for the flight attendants and gate agents and turned it into a training for legal. So we would start to learn the kinds of things they've learned about customer service and ingrain that in our way of doing things. And I think that also helps us retain the confidence and build the relationships that illustrate the value of what we bring to the table.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fred. And so next up, what are the major differences between private practice and your in-house practice? So this could be anything. We've already covered a little bit about the depth of the partnership with the business side, but also lifestyle factors and those sorts of things. Jason, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I was only in private practice for 2 years, so I'd be curious to get someone else's perspective, from the private practice POV. But between private practice and going in-house, I think I was in-house as a lawyer for 8 to 10 years. So the biggest difference is having full context of everything. So in private practice, usually, I was a corporate M&A lawyer and in the tech group at McCarthy's. And so you're usually coming in for at least for my practice, really big transactions, M&A, right? Like outsourcing multi-hundred million into the billion-dollar deals. And so you'd get up to speed and in many cases run those transactions, but you didn't always fully understand the full background of the company. You have a good relationship with them. Whereas in-house, you're fully, if you're interested, you can be fully up to date on the whole context of the company. What are the objectives you're trying to achieve? How does this rank amongst all the other priorities? If you're interested, you can get into that. And that's a really big difference. And it depends on your personality type. If you're transaction oriented, you just want to get big deals done. You're not, at least from my perspective, you're not going to do as many big deals. But the big deals that you're going to do are going to be very personal to you because, in my case, it's selling the company I worked for, buying other companies and integrating those businesses and therefore turning them into colleagues. Those are important things. Just kind of looking at some of the there's a bit of a few questions here, things about hours of work and being with your client, becoming the client for external counsel. So hours of work for me, they were more predictable, but not necessarily shorter. It depends on how big your legal team is. So when I was at the SCORE, which was the sports network that we eventually sold to Rogers Media, and it became one of the Sportsnet channels. I was one of two lawyers, and then eventually became acting general counsel, so one of one lawyers. And my hours were dictated by what we needed to do. When I went over to Rogers and Sportsnet, I think they had a team of 50 at that time, and so especially as I moved more and more to the business, we could load balance, and that became a little bit more predictable versus private practice. So that's one thing I'd say is predictability versus private practice is much higher.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. Nadia, what are some of the differences that you've seen between private practice and your in-house practice?
I was in private practice a little longer than Jason. I saw a huge difference at the beginning. I think that there's still a misconception that whoever is sort of in-house versus in a private practice, we just have like a better work-life balance. I just think that technically we could, I'm not saying otherwise, but because I think that after a certain amount of years that you're in-house, if you kind of get into the higher echelons, then of course you can control your time better, but I don't think there's less work. I think it's just as much work. I think I really do understand what Jason is saying. I think that you could really be completely entrenched into the business. I don't necessarily think it's a choice, to be honest with you. I think at least at L'Oreal we have to be. I think I necessarily have to understand what the CEO wants and then be able to carve out what we can do as a legal team. Otherwise it doesn't work. So that I think is a little bit different. There's definitely that idea, that holistic view of one client instead of just getting that sort of little file where you just have that one intervention, and you have that one file. But at the same time, people that are in private practice will tell you that they wouldn't exchange getting that experience from being in so many different files. So, I think you have to also understand, your personality has to also be that you don't mind being entrenched into one thing and one thing alone and then understanding all the aspects of it. What was interesting being in-house, at least in and we'll talk about it later when we're talking about our career path, what was interesting is that you could delve into other subjects and delve into other areas and other positions and hold different responsibilities. I mean, Fred was naming a few things that he's doing and everybody else as well, and Trish as well. And so you're not just doing law, which at least was important for me because I tended to be bored very quickly. So being a subject matter expert was just not for me. I like being a generalist and kind of being, a jack of all trades and having instincts a little bit everywhere. So that's another thing to consider, because usually when you're going to be in private practice, you'll probably be asked to be a subject matter expert on one thing and one thing alone. Is it IP? Will you be doing commercial law? Will you be doing real estate? And there's a certain security, stability, and satisfaction of really deep diving into one subject, which could be super interesting. But then there's also this other aspect of law, which is that you can look at all sorts of subjects and learn on a constant basis all sorts of areas of law, which I thought was more interesting, at least for my personality. So I think you should really get to know yourself a little bit more. And if that's a tip that I can give you, is really look at who you are and just don't try to squeeze yourself into one area or another. Understand what your personality is. Do you like to know a lot of things, or do you like to really be an expert in one thing? And I think invariably your answer will also come from that.
Excellent. Thanks, Nadia. Fred, what are you seeing as the differences between private practice and your in-house practice?
Yeah, thanks. I certainly echo everything that was just said. Very much my experience as well, and so I won't repeat it, but maybe a couple of other things to add on as I look at my notes here. One of them, you have to get used to it with being part of the business in the sense that your client is you. Right? When you're in private practice, your client can go and do something foolish, and most of your friends won't even know that they were your client, and you can go to a cocktail party or walk the street, and it's all rather anonymous, right? But if one of my friends feels that we lost their bag, I hear about it. If one of our friends, wants to know about what's going on their flight, I hear about it. And when you make headlines, as I think just about every one of the companies we're speaking about today does occasionally, and sometimes for great reasons and sometimes for not so great reasons, it's you. And that proximity is something that you also have to get comfortable with. But of course, all sorts of people throughout the world do that on a regular basis. So I'm sure lawyers are able to make that adaptation. But it was something that was a little different when I came in. you do have to be a little aware of the limits in your role. I spoke of them a little while ago, that kind of objectivity, some of those code of ethics kind of rules that you still have to think through, and I think are still being thought through by many people, because you do sometimes have to have the tact and ability to deliver some bad news and do it in a way that keeps the client engaged and keeps the client willing to work through that with you. And that comes from having the objectivity and the knowledge to back yourselves up, but also the skill to work with people. I think one of the things that I found very interesting is I do find myself much more involved in translating law into action. And so when new laws come along, I find the in-house bar asks a lot more questions about how things are going to work. Somehow we end up having to probe it a little deeper than some people who might just nod and smile and say, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great way to frame it on the page. We're the ones, I think, who more frequently have to think about, all right, how does this really play out? Who's going to have to change what they're doing? How are they going to report on that? How does that affect our day-to-day? And I think that's one thing that I find really interesting. I think it speaks a bit to that expertise Nadia was speaking about. Once you really know that area, you can start to anticipate those kind of things. But in addition to the longer hours, I certainly feel longer hours than I had in private practice, but in some ways they're more interesting hours. In some ways, they're also more difficult hours, because when bad things do happen, you are the first ones they call. And bad things of any number of forms are going to happen in a business of the scale that we're talking about here. And as you may hear my dog pointing out something bad happening behind me right now, I apologize. But bad things are gonna happen, and you have to be ready to deal with that. And I think for some of us who've come in from the outside, the intensity of the emotion that can come with that is a difficult thing to challenge. And you also have to get ready to be a little isolated from the rest of the bar. You're not going to run into other lawyers in the concourse, in the restaurants, and so on. And you're going to spend a lot more time with people who aren't lawyers. Some people, like my wife, would think that's a good thing. Other people, not so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Fred. Those are some dynamics that I hadn't considered in terms of like being a face for the particular organization. Trish, what are some of the differences that you've noticed between private practice and your current in-house practice?
Yeah, I certainly agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said. And so I'll just try and maybe look at it in a different way, which is, sometimes I think the difference is in the question that you're asked. Often we're asking external counsel the question, what can we do? What does the law say that we can do? What are the issues? When you're in-house, you are asked the question, what should we do? So that is a much broader question. It assumes that you know the law. The law is, for my role, the law is, it's a framework, it's a tool for how I do my job, but it's not all of how I do my job, because when people come to me and my team, they want to know what should we do, which means, what can we legally do? What can we ethically do? What's the right thing to do for our clients? What's the reputational risk? What's the financial risk? All of those things are implied in that, very important question. So that's one of the ways that I think about, the differences. The other thing I would say is, and, just kind of picking up, Fred, on what you said, very much on the front line, very much, the first person to call when something goes sideways. We are problem solvers. And while it's true that we're often working with great partners as external counsel, we then translate, what they told us. I mean, I can't remember the last time I wrote a memo. Honestly, as an in-house lawyer, I'm either speaking with people or I'm sending them a short email, we should do this, we need to do that. So it's in the way, I would say, that, we deliver the advice in a much more, I would say, business friendly and clear and concise way. That's one of the ways that I think about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Trish. And Nadia, what are some of the opportunities and benefits that come with working in-house? And conversely, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced?
I think it's funny because I was thinking about how to answer this question, and I think sometimes it joins up what we just finished saying, to some extent. But there's probably one thing I can add. I think that you have to, as far as the challenge, I think you have to understand, just like Fred and Trish were saying, is that you need to understand the pressures that are involved. with being in-house, because it's true that you are seen as a problem solver. You're absolutely right, Trish. You are the front line when anything happens, and it can go from what should we do with this marketing print ad, whatever it is, or Nadia, there's we're about to have a cocktail. Like, I mean, they ask you everything. We're about to have a cocktail, and should I have security there? I mean, they really see you as the end all and be all at this point, which is good because it means that we're top of mind. But it's also sometimes you have to reframe what it is that, what your role is and what you really need to do. And the other difficulty is sometimes you have to be careful that your clients won't use you sort of as the person that ultimately has the responsibility for some of the decisions that are being taken. I found it sometimes very difficult because, I think you have to have a lot of courage when you're in in-house counsel, because you are ultimately the one that may, in the end, give that piece of advice that changes the course of what's going to happen in the business. So it's a lot of responsibility, but what I often would not appreciate was that a manager would use you as sort of the reasons why something maybe didn't work, why something didn't move, why something, didn't happen because they relied on some piece of advice that you gave. Ultimately the business is the one to take the decision. Of course, you're there to guide them as much as you possibly can into, like we said, be those guardians. It happened very, very rarely, do not get me wrong, but still when it happened, I think it's kind of irksome. But as far as opportunities, that also gives you a sense of, there's an immense opportunities of growth. I think that's the one that I think is the most obvious. For me anyways, I can't tell you, I think, how much you can grow in an in-house position so quickly because you're faced with so many of these different issues. There's this incredible opportunity to understand a business, which is very different than when you're in private practice, because you are that subject matter expert that needs to write that memo, which is 25 pages because you're on an hourly rate, So, I think the difficulty for me, and yet an opportunity, is that you have external counsel that, has been trained to give that memo, and you might be able to be very clear on what kind of memo that you need, but then it's difficult for them to understand just to give you a business opinion, because they don't want to take that risk. So I think it's very difficult for external counsel, so private practice counsel, to understand sometimes what we really need. We're being asked to take decisions on a dime every day, and this is what you have to be really comfortable with, which is my other point. Your stress is constantly being tested, because right now, in my time right now, it's 6:30 at night, but at 7 o'clock, someone might still be coming at my door at the office and going, "Oh my God, this happened, what do I do?" And it could be in an area of law you've never even thought of. So this is what's exciting, and you have to have a personality that, likes that, but also, it could be a little scary. So I think, whatever is an opportunity can be a difficulty, and what's a difficulty can be an opportunity. Obviously, it depends how you see it. I think it also depends who you are. So I think, again, just, it's a great opportunity of growth. I think you just have to understand, sort of what best is tailored to you as far as your personality.
Thanks, Nadia. Trish, what have you found to be some of the benefits and challenges of your role?
Yeah, I think one of the big benefits is really, the ability to develop expertise across a bunch of different areas. As a general counsel, as Nadia was saying, the business is turning to you for advice on, all kinds of matters. And then at an organization like Sun Life, we take talent and development very seriously. So we have all kinds of lawyers who have joined our team, say as a litigator, have gone on to then do, more corporate type work, have gone into a compliance role or a risk role. We have one of our lawyers who's not with us anymore because he's gone off to be CEO of a company, but he was chief financial officer of the Canadian business. So, if you're interested in more than the law, coming in the door to an organization in legal, I think is a great, kind of opening, and opens up a lot of possibilities for you to really, expand your horizons. On the challenge side, similar to what Nadia was talking about, I think it's, it's really about, giving risk-based advice and taking into account all of the different factors that need to go into, your helping make a decision and really owning the outcomes, right? I say that, what is keeping the president of Sun Life Canada and the executive team awake at night is keeping me awake at night. Like, their problems are my problems. And you know what? Sometimes they're big problems. But again, like Nadia said, I view that it's a double-edged sword. Like, it's a challenge, but it's also, an incredible privilege and an opportunity. So those are the things that I'd call out, Waleska.
Great, thanks, Trish. And Fred, what are some of the opportunities and challenges in your role?
So, Waleska, it wasn't in your questions, but we seem to have entered into the memo debate. So I'd just like to add my two cents to that too, because I think it's a great illustration of a point that a few of us have made about working with the business. It was a few years ago that I actually prohibited memos from my team. At one of my team meetings, I said, we're done. I want no more opinion letters, no more memos going to clients. I said to them, I understand as a professional that sometimes taking the time to think something through like that and putting it down on paper is helpful to make sure you've covered everything, you're good with your logic and so on. But I said, then put it in the folder for whoever's going to pick this up next. What goes to the client is a PowerPoint. And you're going to get no points for the creativity in finding the workaround to insert a footnote into PowerPoint. For all of you out there, there's a reason Microsoft did not include that function. There's also a rule that there's to be no italicized Latin in our PowerPoints, because there should be no Latin in our PowerPoints. You need to do them like the business, speaking for exactly the reasons you just heard. It spawns a conversation. A PowerPoint will never have everything. You get in front of the clients, you can hear what they have to say, and you realize the things they didn't mention. And it's not necessarily because they're going to hide them. They just didn't realize they were important to the analysis. You'll hear where your recommendation is going to run into another problem that needs to be accounted for as you balance all those risks that Trish was just speaking of. So these are the kinds of things that I think, and I think we'll get to a subsequent question, that you really need to learn if you're going to be successful in this role. And that's just a small but very important example of it. I think one of the advantages is you learn just that the rest of the world works these other ways, and we need to catch up. I think lawyers on the whole throughout the profession have actually created a gap between us and those we serve by how we work. And I think that's true whether you're serving large corporations or you're serving whatever walks through the door in a small firm setting anywhere in this country. The ways people work are very similar in every company. At some point in their lives, pretty much everybody is going to be working that way. And so it's not just that CEOs and CFOs expect their legal advice delivered this way, but everybody who works for one of those people expects their legal advice delivered this way. And they expect Amazon to have it there tomorrow or Shopify to have it there tomorrow, but we tell them it's going to take 3 years for your case to be sorted out in the courts. And it just drives a gap that people then scratch their heads and say, what is it that you're really adding that's valuable here? And all of these things factor into what we need to deliver to regain some relevance there. So I think being in-house is there's an advantage. To come back to your question then, Waleska, sorry for the side note. I think, as you've heard, it's a great opportunity to be much more involved in the decision making, and that can be very rewarding. It's challenging, but very rewarding to be there. You can have a broader impact, as Trish was just saying. That what should we do question, I think, plays to a lot of our strengths, even though it's not necessarily material that we covered in law school, but there's something we can draw on there to help think through the implications of decisions. One of the things that's related to that I noticed early on was you're there once the consultants and lawyers leave. And it's a real opportunity to get into the core of the decision, because when they're outsiders in the room, much as their advice is valuable, they go on to their next client and their advice is left behind, and it doesn't always necessarily fit with what the business is looking for. And you're the one who's going to try to bridge the gap there. I think something else that was interesting and certainly drew me to this role was learning how to manage and lead, because in a private firm, you're the revenue generating unit and everything is geared to make your life that way easier. I know it's a difficult job at times, but you have the support of all the other functions to help you go out there, find the files and get the work done. Here, you're responsible for a team if you're in a leadership role in-house, and it's an opportunity, I think, to learn and develop skills in that regard, which are also very rewarding, and even take a page from the business like Nadia did and move over into an operations function, something that really bridges those two worlds and also leads to all sorts of things that you don't cover in law school. So I'd say those were the advantages. The disadvantages, you're dealing with many of the same kind of challenges that other business people face. You have limited budgets. You're always looking for more tech support, and the tech support we need is not mission critical. right? If the booking system goes down, the tech department is buzzing, but if legal has an issue with Word, we might hear from them in a few days. So you're kind of on your own for some of these things. I mentioned earlier, it can be very isolating. You don't run into lawyers casually. You don't have people now in the hall necessarily. You can always bounce things off. And even when you're an in-house team, and now that we've grown from a lot of places just having one or two lawyers to teams of lawyers, even then you don't necessarily have somebody who you can bounce something off either, because it's very sensitive or because it's an area of expertise that's very much in a niche. So it's very isolating, and you have to balance that with it being very intense. And we've spoken about some of those bad news situations. I think those are an opportunity, though, for us to shine if we embrace it. And so COVID has been one of those things. I think, like many here, our business evaporated very quickly. And at the same time, we faced a number of new laws, and we had to deal with parts of laws that were already on the books, but we never really had to deal with before. And so you're having to give opinions and views and recommendations on things that aren't in your sort of general pool of knowledge that you draw on day to day, and getting comfortable with that uncertainty, understanding how to convey the risks involved in that. Can be very stressful for us. But in times like a COVID crisis, at times when bad things happen, either financially or with your people. One of the ones that really marked my team, for those of you in the GTA, you may recall the headlines a few years ago when we had an accident on the ramp at Toronto that actually killed one of our ramp workers. And the shockwave that sent through the company, and the executives who are reaching out to you now and saying, what do we do, and looking for support far beyond just the legal support and those kind of things is the kind of intensity I'm speaking of, that can be a real burden, but also a real opportunity to learn as you help guide people through the consequences of some of those kinds of issues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Fred, for that. Jason, what are some of the opportunities and challenges that you have found in your in-house practice?
I'll just stick to the biggest opportunity for me was exposure to the business, right? I think somebody asked in the chat, it seems like I'm not in a legal role. I'm not a lawyer for Shopify. In fact, I maintain my private practice entirely now on the side for my own investments and a few other things that I'm working on. So it actually frees me up to use my legal skills in other ways. But the reason I'm not in legal is because I got into the business in a legal capacity over time, kind of built my reputation around becoming more of a business leader than a legal leader, and just made the switch over time. That I would say is, if you're not sure, now that I think about it, when you graduate law school, for a lot of people, they're in their 20s. I don't know how you know that you want to be a lawyer for the next 30 years. So for me, one of the reasons I went to McCarthy's was to get that kind of broad-based, big corporate experience. And then when I went in-house, it was to kind of follow my passion of sports. And over time, that led me into more of the business, et cetera. But that was a decision to keep my options open to see what I liked. And I think in-house, you will get that exposure. Whereas in private practice, after a while, other than a rare case, you're not going from private practice into a senior job in the business.
And Jason, sticking with you, since you've already started to touch on it, can you say a bit more about your path to your current role, and whether there were, at what point did you kind of decide that you wanted to go this route, and how did you go about making those moves?
Yeah, my entire career has been built on a lucky, better be lucky than good, I'd say. So one of the things I realized early on was that I'm really only super interested in things I'm interested in, and I'll put a lot of effort into those things. But if I'm not super interested, I'll probably do okay work. And so when I was in private practice, I actually really liked McCarthy's, and the tech group is amazing. They're still, I learned a lot, worked on some really good deals there. But then this opportunity came up at the Score, which is a sports network and was my favorite sports network. And so I figured, I've got to at least try, and it worked out and ended up going in there. So that was just following my interest, right? And for me, if I'm interested, I'm enthusiastic. And if I'm enthusiastic, I'm going to do great work. And so that's just my simple heuristic. In terms of once I got in there, I started taking on more and more business. We're a small company. The Score was, $170 million company by the time we sold it. And, a team of 200, like I said, 2 lawyers start with, eventually dropping down to 1. And so you basically had to do all of these things that weren't purely legal. And then over time, I started realizing I enjoyed that, started proving myself in those areas, starting learning about the other areas. And then when we eventually sold ourselves to Rogers Media, I think there was just some executives there that saw that potential in me and started giving me more and more opportunities on the business side, to the point where technically when the sale happened, I went over into the Rogers sort of legal sort of headcount. But eventually they said, you have to make a choice. You can't be in legal and be in the business, which is interesting, right? I understand now why that was, but that was actually a very difficult choice for me at the time, because it was giving up sort of my career in one profession and going into an unknown. And I think they forced me into that choice maybe 6 or 7 years post call, which is decent. But 6 or 7 years post call, you're not that senior that you think you can leave for 3 years and come back. So it was a bet. Like, I had to make a bet that I'd be able to. Now that I'm, that was a while ago. Now I think I could actually go back into law, being a pure play lawyer, despite having been away from entirely law for maybe 5 years. And so it's just, you need to develop that confidence. And it actually was a leap of faith to go from in-house to purely business, because like I said, it was like I was giving up a career.
So there has to be a bit of risk tolerance if you want to follow this path.
Yeah, if you want to end up where I am, which is very far away. But the upside is, you get to lead cross-functional teams, which I find really fun, and partner with legal if you want to, and which I already do, and makes me both a great client and also the worst client. I'm sure the in-house legal will explain what it's like to have a business person that was also a lawyer.
Nadia, can you tell us a little bit about your path to working in-house?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a little bit like Jason, but like I said before, I get bored very easily. So even during law school, I started questioning myself, even if I still wanted to be a lawyer. But I figured I went this far. I did my bachelor's. I might as well go through all of this. And originally my idea was to go into criminal law, and for X reason it didn't happen. And so I jumped into a very small litigation firm. And even there, so within 2 years that I was in this small firm, and I love being in a small firm because it made me, and it was my choice, because I really wanted to get into the trenches, because the larger law firms had like 13 stagiaires or articling students, and I would be the only one. So I was able to go to the court really fast, and that was the idea, was to get more experience and really get into it. And so I really learned a lot, because I was the only articling student, and did a lot of really interesting work. And they ended up merging with another law firm, and very quickly I asked if I could jump ship from litigation to corporate, which is not a usual path at all. But again, and this has been, I think, the message throughout, and you'll understand when I'm saying this, but I always asked. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give you throughout all of my career path, you'll see, is always to take the risks and to ask, because all you get out of this is maybe a no, at worst. So I asked, and they said, sure, why not? We're about to merge with another firm, let's do it. So I did 4 years of transactional, M&A, financing. I mean, it was just a crazy ride, all-nighters, trying to do transactional work and not knowing what was going on. And then thought, that's it, I can't take this anymore, I've got to leave. I can't do law anymore, and jumped ship. Left and thought, okay, well, what can I do now? And went literally into legal recruitment for a full 7 months. Just because I figured that's the only way that I can understand what I can do with my law degree, not because I really wanted to be a recruiter. And found myself a job at Avon, for some of you that don't know. So it's the Avon ladies, that's exactly what it is. It's another beauty company, and found a small contract of 6 months. There again, we kind of mutually, I can say it like that without wanting to sound pretentious, but we mutually fell in love with each other. I really loved the company. It was going really, really well. And so they had me get into this executive training program. So I left law yet again to get into a sort of marketing campaign planning position for about 14 months. And all of this, all the time while thinking to myself, wow, I haven't practiced law now in 2 years. But going back and forth the whole time. But again, always acquiring skills as I'm going, because that's also the point. Then Avon unfortunately went through a very difficult time, because their CEO was unfortunately caught for fraud. And so the business started going down. And that's when I thought, well, that'd be interesting for me to jump ship now. And invariably found myself at L'Oreal through a recommendation. I never thought I'd be here 15 years later, because it'll be 15 years in July. But yet again, in my usual modus operandi, I'm sorry, that is a Latin term, Fred, I'm just using that one. So in my usual mode of working, I got fed up and thought, okay, what else can I do here? And so started quickly asking, within maybe 2.5 years that I was there, okay, so what else can I do? And it started, I saw that someone at sourcing was leaving, and so I thought maybe I can do sourcing. And then they thought, no, we need someone that's a pro in sourcing. I thought, okay, no problem. I thought maybe I could just jump into marketing. And they said, no, I think the CFO at the time who I was reporting to was too happy to see me in the position that I was in, didn't want me to move, and said no. So I said, okay, fine. And slowly but surely, I started, because of my asking, they understood that I wanted to kind of spread my wings. And so I got ethics. So they made me responsible for ethics for Canada. And that lasted pretty much the 12 years that followed right before I arrived here in Paris. And then about 7 years in, the communications person was leaving. She decided to leave after our CEO was leaving. And I thought, you know what? I've never thought of doing communications. God knows that we have a great skill in legal. We know how to communicate quite well. It's not the same thing as communications, mind you, but it was really interesting. So I went up to the president, who I was then, he was also just starting in his position, and said, listen, why don't you just put me in the interim in the communications department while you're recruiting for a real communications expert? I'm curious. It'll help you. It'll help me. And that lasted 7 years. So it was not, he gave it to me fully. And then the same thing with corporate social responsibility. It's a field that I love, and I think it's super interesting. And through the communications part of it, we needed to communicate on it, and they didn't have anybody to coordinate the program. So I raised my hand and I said, hey, I can do it if you want. Now, I'm not going to kid you. For 7 years, having 4 hats, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and we didn't have very large teams. But it also taught me that, this is the only way that you're really going to grow. And to Trish's point, I mean, L'Oreal has this open view of a very entrepreneurial way of looking at a person. And so if you do ask, there's a good chance that you'll get, and if I can just say this to the women that are listening in particular, and I'm sure you've heard this several times, and I don't mean to be a cliche, but quite often women will wait until they have all the skills for a position in order to ask, in order to, get into that position, or even to apply for that position. And that is a big mistake, because men don't often have that way of thinking. If they see a listing, a posting for a position, if they have about, I think the estimate is that 50 or 60% of the skills, they go for it and they just try it. And so if I have a piece of advice for everybody, is just raise your hand when you're interested in something, because this is what can ultimately make the shift and change your life and really bring you to the points where you're really interested and always motivated and super curious about your job and really be happy in it. So that's pretty much what happened to me.
Thanks so much, Nadia. It strikes me that serendipity, but also seizing opportunities seems to be a big part of the development of an in-house counsel role. So that's a great message. I'm just conscious of the time, and so I think what we're going to do, I think most of our panelists are going to be joining us on Thursday for the networking event. So we have seen a couple of questions in the chat, so maybe the students who raised those questions could bring those to the networking session. And perhaps in the couple of minutes we have left, I would ask Fred and Trish for the advice they might have for law students who are considering an in-house counsel pathway. Trish, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, just very quickly, I would say the traditional path has been from private practice, and I think that still continues to be the case, with the caveat that there are, organizations that have, articling programs, and, they're seeing students come in straight from law school and then, stay and grow within the company. I mean, Sun Life hasn't done that yet. It's kind of on my list of things to do, but we haven't done it yet. So I would say it's still a fairly typical path to start in private practice, get great training there, and then, at a certain point, make the transition to in-house. So my advice to students is actually to focus on not only your legal skills, but your communication skills. Be a good writer and be a clear and concise speaker, because I think you're hearing a consistent message from this panel. Being in-house, you just have to cut to the chase. What should we do? That's what it is. And so, that would be the piece of advice that I would offer today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Trish. Fred.
So a few quick hits here, just picking up on Nadia's point for Women General Counsel. There's a great book that was published a few years ago in conjunction with the CCCA called, or promoted with the CCCA, was Breaking Through. It was put together by Kirby Chan and Carrie Mandel in Toronto. And I think it has some great advice for everybody who's going in-house, but it profiles 30 of Canada's Women General Counsel and their career path and how they found their way to the positions they're in. And I highly recommend it. It's mandatory reading for my team at Air Canada. And what do you do about it? To get to a position like these, I echo Trish. Get yourself some good training. That used to be in a good firm. Increasingly, there are large enough in-house departments where I think you can get that kind of exposure that you need, because often, back to that nugget I mentioned earlier, we do a very narrow piece of what the law involves. And if it doesn't work out, you need a broader skill set to be able to find your way elsewhere. So make sure that you get some good exposure and some people who are helpful in teaching and mentoring, so that you grow and into being a really competent lawyer for all those things you didn't learn in law school. In addition to the things they're going to teach you about just how to practice, it's those same business skills, communications right up there, and you can learn these things. And there are actually programs out there. So the Institute for the Future of Legal Practice helps people who want to get into legal operations. They've got some great Canadian and American leaders in that program who do, I think, a fantastic job of the first real program to train on legal ops. Harvard Law School's Center on the Legal Profession offers some great training for corporate counsel as well as law firm leaders. Some of it is sort of exec ed format. You're there for a week or so. Some of it's more one day here, one day there. A lot of it is now online, and they've done a lot of work that's been published on what it means to be a general counsel, and I commend that to you as well. Over at U of T Rotman, the CCCA has partnered with Rotman to produce the Certified In-House Counsel Program, which is about a 2-year-long program in an exec ed kind of format, which is also, I think, very helpful in terms of learning the ropes. And once again, back to the CCCA, but they offer something called spring training for new to in-house every spring as part of their national conference, which I think is another great way for you to find the kinds of skills that Trish and you've heard the others mention are key to this. The last thing I would say is get involved in the profession. The profession needs the voices of the in-house bar around the table when they're looking at how we're regulated, how we're growing, where we're going next. And it's a great way for you to build the kind of network that you're going to need to call on when difficult things come along, and to find the opportunities to grow your own career. So those would be my tips.
Valeska, do you mind if I just jump in for 2 seconds? I know that I'm not being directed, but if there is one last piece of advice, and please correct me, Fred, Trish, Jason, if you don't think so, but I won't lie to you. I think that going to private practice, even if it is for a couple of years first, will invariably make you a better in-house counsel. And not because, I think personally, I've taken articling students, by the way, directly from law school, and it is good. But I think that you just have this training and just this base where you might be a little bit stronger once you get into in-house. So making that jump right into in-house is very possible, not saying otherwise. I just always found that it was very helpful because you understood much more, I think, the consequences of what you were either writing, drafting, speaking of, than just if you jumped in-house. But that, again, depends, I think, also the in-house program that you have as an articling student. So I invite any of the others to bounce back again. For them, I'm totally wrong, but it's still my impression.
I totally agree with that. I was actually thinking the same thing. My piece of advice is it takes a long time to actually become a competent lawyer. You're probably not that good for about 5 years. I know some of you are gold medalists, and I know some of you are working at some big firms, but I can tell the difference between when I'm speaking to a third-year lawyer and a fifth-year lawyer, and it's stark. So please focus on the craft. We are ultimately craftspeople, and if you're not good at your craft, I'm not sure what you're bringing to the table other than like intelligence and enthusiasm. So please bring, the craft as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. I have certainly learned a lot. I think I speak for everyone when I say that you all provided some really new information that is not easy to find, some really practical advice. So thank you all for taking the time today. As I mentioned, we will be having the networking session Thursday afternoon, and students, I encourage you to bring your questions to that so that we can follow up on what you've learned today. Thank you, Valerie, for hosting the session, and I look forward to seeing all of you again on Thursday. Take care, everyone.